Welcome to the Koop Scoop. I'm Steve Kuplast. This is episode 1 of today we're going to be talking baseball. So today I want to talk about the best players I ever saw growing up. So at the catcher position, I'm going to have to say it would be Ivan Rodriguez, as he won a bunch of different Gold Gloves, a good offensive player, won an MVP award a couple times. Never won did win a World Series with the Marlins. And he was a very good fielding catcher. He threw up almost, I think it was about 80% of the base runners in his career. My first baseman is a little tricky, but I'm going to have to go with, I would probably say Mark McGwire. I know he was accused of steroids and all that other nonsense, but when he hit his 70 home runs in '98, that was one of the better seasons I ever saw. Wasn't a great fielding first baseman, but the guy could hit. At second base, I would say would be Roberto Alomar. He was a switch hitter. He won the Gold Glove almost every single year. Could steal bases, hit for high average, hits a bunch of home runs, drove in a lot of runs. Played on some World Series teams, was in the postseason almost every single year. He was a guy who hit at the top of the lineup. See, for shortstop, I would have to say would be Nomar, just because I grew up in New England. I know he wasn't a great fielder, but he could hit. Had one of the better offensive seasons I ever saw at a right-handed hitter. I want to say it was in 2000. I think he hit over 370. He was hitting 400 for quite a while. Let's see, for third base, third base is a little bit more tricky, but I'm going to go with Chipper Jones because he was probably one of the better switch hitters I ever saw. Was, again, a guy who won in the postseason almost every year. Hit for home runs, drove in runs. My outfield, I'm going to go with Barry Bonds in left field. I mean, he was a guy who could field, he could steal bases, won some Gold Gloves, a bunch of MVP awards. All-time home run hitter. Never won a World Series. He did play in one, but obviously this team didn't win. Center field is Ken Griffey Jr. He was a 5'2" player, probably one of the better players I ever saw when they play the game. He could, obviously before all his injuries, before he had all those injuries, I thought he was going to hit like 800 home runs, but he was a guy who hit 50 home runs every year, drove in well over 100, stole bases, never got to the World Series, had an opportunity, but didn't want to play. Didn't want to play in cities that he thought were racist cities. He didn't want to go to Boston or Atlanta or New York. He spent most of his time in Seattle. So obviously Seattle didn't have some great teams during his time. They had some good players, but didn't have great teams. Unfortunately, he never got a chance to win a World Series. For right field, I got to go with Larry Walker. I thought he had one of the best arms I ever saw as a right fielder. He never got to a World Series that I remember. He did get to a World Series, but not with Colorado. But he was an MVP winner, hit for high average, could hit a ton of home runs. There is some criticism because he played in Colorado most of his career. So a lot of people concerned about him. Well, he made the Hall of Fame. For the designated hitter, I'm going to have to say would be Edgar Martinez. He was a guy who could hit for average, hit some home runs, drove in runs. Again, never won a World Series, played his whole career in Seattle. But he was a beast. My pitching staff, I'm going to go with Pedro Martinez as my ace. His seasons he put together with the Red Sox, especially in 1999 and 2000, probably some of the best pitching seasons I ever saw in history. I think 99, I want to say he won well over 20 games, had over 300 strikeouts, pitched over, I think, close to 300 innings. ERA, I think that year was under 2. I'm going to have to go with the guys in Atlanta, go with John Smoltz, Greg Madison, Tom Glavine. Unfortunately, like I said, the Braves only won the one championship with those guys in the pitching staff. But great teams. My close, I got to go with Mariano Rivera just because he's the greatest all time. I think he had over 600 career saves. Let's see. Want to switch focus now, and I want to talk about Bobby Cox because I still feel Bobby Cox had a chance to win more than one championship with Atlanta. He obviously didn't. He did get to the World Series a few years with Atlanta. But had it not been for the season he had in 95, he would never won a World Series. But Bobby Cox, he had the 14 consecutive division titles with Atlanta. He only got to the World Series that 1 year in 1995. His team should have won the World Series in 96, but they didn't. Biggest issue with Bobby Cox that I felt as a manager with the Braves, he didn't have a great bullpen. He's going up against guys like Mariano Rivera and the Yankees. He obviously had a better bullpen than he had, but the thing about Bobby Cox when he managed the Braves was every October you could count on the Braves being in the postseason. They just could never win when it mattered the most. Let's see, the 96 World Series, though, did get away from the Braves, in my opinion. I mean, Jim Leris' home run in, I want to say it was Game 4, Game 5, off of Mark Wohlers, that kind of put momentum back to the Yankees' favor. 97, the Braves, they got to the postseason, but I forget who they lost to. Obviously, the Marlins went on to win the World Series in 97. 98, the Braves had lost in the postseason. I want to say it was San Diego ended up going to the World Series that year. 99, the Bobby Cox did get the Braves back to the World Series, but they were swept by the Yankees in the World Series that year. The 1999 World Series, the Braves stood no chance. Let's see. I know. What else? Let's see. Other things I wanted to switch focus now. I want to talk about the pace of play in the game today. To me, the games, when you have a game that's over 5 hours long, it's too long of a game. The biggest problems I know with the game of baseball today is you have too many pitching changes. I know that they were trying to limit the number of pitches that teams can carry at once. Let's see. I know they did introduce a pitching clock, but they're not enforcing it. We're supposed to be 20 seconds in between pitches, but they haven't really been enforcing it that much. Let's see. Other thing with obviously offense is being down in the game today, which biggest issue I feel why offense is down is batters are taking too many pitches nowadays, which is another reason why the game is taking so long to play. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? Obviously, base stealing is down in the game. The walks are up high, strikeouts are higher than ever before. Batting averages are down. Let's see, what else is there? So we have commercial breaks. Obviously, you have a commercial break every time a pitch and change happens or a substitution happens. Let's see. I want to go do Terry Francona for a minute. I want to talk about how Terry Francona, how he changed the Red Sox in a way. To me, I feel he still should. I still think he should be the manager of the Red Sox to this day. When he won the World Series in 2004, he broke the curse of the Bambino. He was praised for that, and then he kind of won. He won another World Series in 2007 with the Red Sox, and then he had that meltdown, that bad season, where they go like 9-20 in that September in 2011, and he was gone after that. But I feel the Red Sox should have kept him. I feel they kind of got rid of probably the best manager they ever had just for the fall apart they had in 2011. We go back to 2004 for a minute when Red Sox are down 3-0 against the Yankees in the best of 7. He's able to get momentum. They were able to win the next 4 games to get to the World Series and win the World Series that year. I mean, Francona had some great players around him when he was with the Red Sox. He had guys like David Ortiz and Manny Ramirez, and he did have Curt Schilling and Pedro Martinez there for a little bit. He had Johnny Damon was there. Tim Wakefield was around. He had Jason Varitek around. But I feel the 2011 season when they had that epic collapse in September, where I feel they blamed Terry Francona for all the issues going on, whether it be the chicken and bear in the clubhouse or the players not wanting to play for him anymore. He had the Carl Everett saga in 2011, in which with Carl Everett, I mean, when the Red Sox picked him up, he was one of the top outfielders in the free agent outfielders when they got him. Bring him aboard and has a disaster with the team in 2011. What else was there with Francona? Obviously, the saga with Nomar in 2004 when they traded him mid-season. Everybody blamed him for that as well. Let's see. What else? What else to talk about? There would be. I want to switch and go back to the 1998 season for a minute, because to me that was one of the best all-around seasons I ever saw. I mean, you had the great home run chase, obviously they ended with McGwire and Sosa, but there was 4 different guys who had 50 home runs that season. Never happened in history of the game before. You had Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Greg Vaughn, Ken Griffey Jr. all hit 50 home runs that season. Vinny Castilla was in the home run chase a little bit, but he tailed off. Larry Walker was involved, but he fell off a little bit. Mo Vaughn was a bit early in the season, but he kind of cooled off. But the 98 season, obviously the Yankees, they won over 100 games that year, won the World Series, but to me that was one of the best all-around offensive seasons in history. We had all those home runs, had some great pitches. You had guys like Kerry Wood being brought up. You had Randy Johnson was traded mid-season. Pedro Martinez was around. You had the big 3 in Atlanta with Smoltz, Maddox, and Glavine. Who else? You had Mike Hampton was unbelievable that year. You had Al Leiter. David Wells was still pitching. David Cohen was there. Yankees bringing in Orlando Hernandez to help them with in the pennant race that year. You had, obviously, like I said, the great home run chase obviously it ended with McGwire and Sosa. Then you go into the 99 season, McGwire and Sosa were still going in the home run chase, but I think Sosa led the league in home runs. One thing I wanted to bring up was I wanted to go to the Mariners team in 2011. That team set the record for most wins in a season, but failed to win the World Series. The Mariners that year, they lost. They didn't have Randy Johnson. They didn't have Ken Griffey Jr. anymore. Edgar Martinez, I think, was still there. Alex Rodriguez is no longer there. Lou Piniella was managing the team. He was able to set the modern-day record for most wins in the season. But obviously the Mariners, they failed to win the World Series that year. You had probably Brett Boone, who had one of the best offensive seasons ever by a second baseman that year. I think he had over 120 RBIs that year. Mike Cameron had over 100-something RBIs, had over 20-something home runs. Edgar Martinez was coming to the end of his career. They had great pitching with Aaron Seeley and Freddie Garcia. Jamie Moyer was in that mix. They had their 2 Japanese stars with Ichiro, and I can't think of the other guy's name, but the closer who was also Japanese. I think he had over 200 hits that season. I think he set, I don't know if it was that year or not, but he did break George Sisler's record for most hits in the season. Not sure if it was that year or the following seasons. Let's see. You had, then obviously the collapse from the Mariners afterwards. They lost, obviously, Jay Buhner and Edgar Martinez to free agency. Brett Boone kind of fell off. Freddie Garcia was out of Seattle, and a couple of years later. Let's see. What else I want to mention about that team? Carlos Guillermo was coming up on his own, but he wasn't established yet. I don't know if I think Raul Ibanez was on that team, or might have not been. I'm not 100% sure. Let's see. I wanted to switch. I want to talk about the Jimy Williams saga with the Red Sox for a minute. Jimy Williams, he was related, I believe, to Ted Williams. I'm not sure if he was a cousin or a brother or however it was, but he was related somehow to Ted Williams. He did have there were certain ways that Jimy Williams wanted to manage the team, and the ownership didn't want him to manage it the way he wanted to. I know when the Red Sox signed Steve Avery, he wanted Steve Avery in the rotation. The management didn't want him to. He insisted on having Steve Avery pitch in the starting rotation. It didn't obviously end up happening the way he wanted it to. He wasn't really a big fan of Carl Everett. Obviously, we know when Carl Everett had that suspension, was kind of a troublemaker in the clubhouse. The ownership wanted Carl Everett around. Jimy Williams wanted no part with Carl Everett. He had a couple other guys coming up through the system that were considered offensive players, but never really got it together, and he didn't want him. Jimy Williams didn't want them to play, and the ownership wanted them to be in the lineup. Then obviously when the Red Sox went after Uga Urbina to be the closer, and Jimy Williams insisted on Derek Lowe remaining closer, and ownership didn't want Derek Lowe as a closer, they bring on Uga Urbina, who's an all-star, always an all-star closer. There was that saga going on. There was obviously the saga with Brian Dahlbach going on with whether or not Dahlbach complained about playing time and he wasn't getting enough playing time. Ownership wanted them to be in the lineup more, and Jimy Williams kind of had him as a platoon first baseman. They had the Lou Maloney epic with him, with going back and forth from AAA to the Major League club. Obviously with Jose Offerman, who was originally signed to play at first baseman, and Jimy Williams insisted on him playing second base. They continued to keep Offerman as a second baseman. They had the situation with Trot Nixon and Darren Lewis. Obviously, Trot Nixon was coming up through the system. Darren Lewis was more of an established outfielder at that time. They had the situation with Mo Vaughn. Mo Vaughn coming in the free agency. He wanted to stay in Boston. Jimy Williams wanted him to stay. The ownership didn't want him there. So they had that going on. They obviously had the pitching issues with guys like Brett Sabag and Pete Sherrick and Steve Avery at the end of their careers. Obviously, and then didn't really work out with Jimy Williams. He was there, I think, for 4 or 5 years, and the Red Sox decided it was time to let him go. What else do we want to mention? I wanted to talk about the Kansas City Royals team in 2016, because they were able to prove that it is possible to win a World Series based off of having a strong bullpen. The Royals team that year, they had, I want to say it was maybe 4 or 5 guys in the bullpen they relied on every single night. They did make a trade at the beginning of the starting pitcher to help them get to the World Series. But that team was able to prove that you don't have to have your starting pitchers go 7-8 innings a game to win a World Series. So I think the average for that team, they may have had like 5 or 6 innings from their starting pitching, and then they were able to go to the bullpen. They had some good guys. I can't think of the guys' names they had in the bullpen, but they were able to prove. I think the bullpen ERA that year was just under 3 that year. Let's see. What else I want to talk about? Let's talk about. I want to talk about probably the worst team in history I ever saw. That was the 2003 Detroit Tigers. That team that year, They lost 119 games. They were on pace to set the modern day record for most losses in a season. They began the year losing the first 9 games or 11 games. But that team was just, they were averaging maybe 2-3 runs a game. They outscored about 5 runs a game. Dmitry Young was their best all-around player, the only all-star for the team that year. They began the year with Alan Trammell. I think Alan Trammell was the manager for that team. He was a legend in Detroit. It never really was a good manager, I don't think. But the team did get some got national notarized towards the end of the season when they were on pace to set the record for most losses in the season. But they were able to win their final game of the season to avoid losing 120 games that year. Let's see. But they did improve the next season. I mean, a couple of years later, they were really bringing guys like Rondell White, Ivan Rodriguez. They brought him in. They were able to draft Justin Verlander. They were able to bring in Jeremy Bonderman. They brought in Placido Polanco when Carlos Guillen was brought around. Sean Casey came around. So they were able to improve things. They did get to the World Series a few years later, but didn't end up obviously winning the World Series at all. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the fire sale from the Marlins team, and that. So as the Marlins won the World Series in '97, they basically unloaded and got rid of all their superstar players. They got rid of guys like Gary Sheffield and Rob Nen, Jeff Conine. They got rid of him. They got rid of Bobby Bonilla. Jim Eisenreich was gone. To me, that was kind of interesting that they have the year that they win the World Series, they get rid of all their superstar players, and then they go on to lose 100 games in the following next couple of seasons. They did it again when the Marlins won the World Series again in 2003. They did the same thing. They got rid of all their superstar players, and they were kind of a bad team for a couple of years afterwards. Let's see. What else is there to talk about? Let's talk about. I want to talk about base stealing because to me, it's a lost art in the game today. Like Ricky Henderson would be disappointed if he was still playing today. To me, the biggest problem is when you have teams having to wait around for a guy to hit a 3-run home run. I mean, when the guy gets on base, if he can run, why not have him try to steal a base? I think it'll be if you bring back base stealing, I think it'll be bring back the enthusiasm that the game has kind of lost today. It'll cut back on the strikeouts, it'll cut back on shift changing. I mean, there's some guys who can run, but when they get on base, they don't run anymore because they're told not to because they want to wait for a 3-run home run. I know the home run is probably probably the most exciting thing about baseball today, but to me, I think if you want to attract the younger base or young fans, to me, you got to bring back base stealing. You got to allow the players instead of taking pitches all the time. You got to allow the batter to swing when they get a strike thrown at them. I think if you want to increase the pace of play, you got to limit the number of pitches being changed, limit the number of substitutions in the middle of innings. When you have 5, 6, 7, 8 pitches being used for one inning, that just drags the game on even further. Let's see. What else do I want to talk about today? I'll keep going. All right, so I'll keep going. So there is a few other. Oh yeah, so let's talk about Bobby Cox, which I know we talked about Bobby Cox earlier. So obviously 14 straight division titles. It's kind of a shame they only had the one championship to show for. It was the strike shortened season in '95 when they beat Cleveland in 6 games. But Obviously, the '96 World Series got away from Bobby Cox. I think the Braves were up 3-1, or in that series. '96, the Braves, they won the first 2 games in New York. They were favored to win the World Series that year. They go back to Atlanta. They lose the next, I think it was the next 3 games. They lose the next 3 in Atlanta. They go back to the Yankee Stadium and lose the final game. Let's see. But some of the best plays I saw that Bobby Cox had were guys like Chipper Jones and Andrew Jones. Andrew Jones is probably one of the better defensive center fielders I ever saw. I mean, I remember seeing him. He could catch. He could chase down fly balls that nobody else could ever catch. I mean, he was a decent hitter, but not a great hitter. But he did strike out quite a bit. But obviously, when the Braves let him walk away to go to Los Angeles, I was kind of disappointed. And his career kind of fell apart after he left Atlanta. But I remember there was when they brought in Mark Kotsay to replace Andrew Jones in center field. And whenever Kotsay couldn't make the play, everybody kept saying, "Oh, Andrew Jones would have made that play." To me, Chipper Jones is probably one of the better switch hitters I ever saw play the game. He obviously was a couple MVPs in his career, won some Gold Gloves. Biggest mistake I feel the Braves made with Chipper Jones was moving him to the outfield. When they moved the outfield to accommodate guys like Julio Franco and Ken Caminiti. Who else? I can't remember who else was doing. But he wasn't a great fielder, Chipper Jones. He was a decent fielder, but not a great fielder. Let's see. Barry Bonds, I think he could have won a World Series, could have won more World Series. He did play on some good teams in San Francisco. They had a chance to win the World Series in 2002, but obviously that World Series slipped away from the Giants when he was there. I think the Giants were up 3-2 against the Angels, and they lost the last 2 games of that series. I think if Barry Bonds had won at least the World Series, he would have been considered for Hall of Fame. I know there's some controversy as whether or not he took steroids or not. I feel like he might have, because he had to sit back on the sideline in '98 and watch guys like Ken Griffey Jr. and Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa go out and have some home run tear, and he was kind of sitting around having to sit back on the sidelines. Let's see. So, other great hitters that I saw play, obviously Nomar was one of the best right-handed hitters I ever saw. There was a period where he was hitting well over 400 for a little bit midway of the season. I think he could have hit 400. I know Ted Williams says it all the time that out of anybody who could hit 400 in the season, Nomar was the guy to do it. I think the highest, I think he hit 377 or 372 that year. But I think if he didn't have that fallout with the management, I think Nomar would have played his whole career in Boston. I think he would have hit 400 had it not been for all the injuries towards his time. Obviously, the wrist started to act up on Nomar when he was with the Red Sox, and then he had the Achilles tear. I think after he tore his Achilles tear, though, he was never the same exact player. I think he would have been a Hall of Famer had it not been again with all the injuries that he had to deal with. I mean, he didn't remain as a shortstop. I think he could have been a third base. I think he would have been a better first baseman with the Red Sox than as a shortstop. Tony Gwynn, I think he could have hit 400. He came close. I think he would have hit 400 had it not been for the strike in '94. He would have hit 400. There's some other guys. I do believe Dustin Pedroia could have hit 400 because he was a guy who was constantly putting the ball in play. I think some speed guys. Who else? I think D. Gordon could have hit 400 very easily. It didn't happen. Larry Walker could have very easily hit 400. But I think who else could hit 400? trying to think in the game today, I think there's a few players who could hit 400. I do believe that Xander Bogaerts could be a 400 hitter at some point. I think Alex Verdugo has a shot to hit 400, not this year, but probably in the future. Who else do I think could hit 400? There's that Japanese player from the Angels. I can't think of his name, but he's a pitcher as well. He could hit 400. Let's see. Some of the best hitters I ever saw as growing up. Besides Kenny Griffey Jr., there was Nomar. There was McGuire was another guy that comes to mind. Sammy Sosa, Larry Walker. Who else was there? There's Matt Williams, I think, was a good hitter. There was Manny Ramirez. Obviously, Derek Jeter. Derek Jeter was probably the best two-strike hitter I ever saw play the game, where he could go straight. With 2 strikes, he was able to hit the ball to right field. It was very difficult to get Jeter to strike out. Let's see what are the guys? I think Todd Helton was a great hitter. Let's see who else. Jay Bell was a great hitter. Albert Bell was another one. Frank Thomas. Obviously, Edgar Martinez comes to mind. Let's see, another thing. I wanted to talk about the designated hitter being introduced to the National League full-time this year. I think it would have given players who normally can't play the field every single day an opportunity to play for other teams. I think it limits pitchers being injured on the base pass now, that they don't have to focus on hitting, they can just focus on pitching. I think eventually, obviously, it's going to increase offense at some point. Obviously, hasn't so far this year, but at some point it will. Let's see. Let's see. What else do I want to talk about? Let's see. We're not things to talk about. We're not things to talk about. So let's see. So let's talk about let's talk about John Kruk for a minute. So the All-Star game. I want to talk about the All-Star game with John Kruk. So it was in 90. I want to say it was a 1993 All-Star game. So John Kruk, he's a left-handed hitter. He's facing Randy Johnson, who was kind of wild at that time. Because early in Randy Johnson's career, he could throw the ball, but he didn't have great command on his pitches. So I think it was in 90. I want to say it was in 93 All-Star game. Randy Johnson was starting the game. John Kruk was the starting first baseman. So John Kruk goes up there, and Randy Johnson throws the ball well over his head, and John Kruk ducks out of the way. And John Kruk afterwards, he wanted nothing to do with that at bat. He basically just swung and missed at pitches that were well out of the strike zone afterwards. So I want to focus on Pete Rose. I do believe Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, I never saw him play. He was before my time, but he's the all-time hits leader. Obviously, it's a disappointment that he was banned for, was it gambling or steroids, whatever it was he was banned for. I do believe he should be in the Hall of Fame. The Cincinnati Reds, though, were kind of a disappointment this year. They begin the year, I think they have 11 wins. They have like almost 30 losses or something like that. But they are on pace to set in the 1962 record for most losses in the season. The Mets currently hold that record with 120, but the Reds are on pace to lose 125 games this season, which would be kind of interesting if they get that way. But I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, obviously the Tigers almost did in 2003. It didn't happen. Let's see. Ted Williams, he talks about hitting 400. Ted Williams is probably the greatest hitter that ever played the game. I talked about it earlier. He said that if anybody was going to hit 400, it was going to be Nomar. And Nomar came close, but obviously it didn't happen. Tony Gwynn is the closest to come close to hitting 400. I think it was 396 or 397 Tony Gwynn hit in 96 or 95. Let's go to Curt Schilling. So Curt Schilling is kind of a guy who I feel should be in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the greatest postseason pitchers to ever play the game, but he's not in the Hall of Fame. This was his final. This year was his last year on the Hall of Fame ballot, but he didn't get voted in. So I think now the Players Committee have a shot to vote him in. But Curt Schilling, he was drafted by the Red Sox originally, was traded to the Orioles for, I want to say it was Mike Bodica, I believe it was. At the time of the trade, the Red Sox were looking for a pitcher to help them get to the postseason, and they were able to get to the postseason. Schilling struggled early on with his career with Baltimore, and then he shipped him to Houston, where he struggled with Houston. But Curt Schilling, he was a closer with the Astros when he got there, and the Astros didn't really think he could be a starter. Then they shipped him off to Philadelphia. Schilling was able to make a name for himself, though. When he got to Philadelphia, he became a full-time starting pitcher. Then he became one of the top pitchers for the Phillies for quite some time. He was there with the Phillies, I want to say, from 92 to 2001 or 2002. Want to say that? But he helped the Phillies get to the World Series in 1993, but they lost to the Blue Jays that year. I think he lost his only start in that World Series to the Blue Jays. It wasn't. He didn't start. I don't think it was a Joe Carter game that he started. But let's see. He was towards the end of his time with Philadelphia. He didn't really. He wanted to win a World Series, and the Phillies weren't going out spending the money to get the players that he wanted by his side to help him get to the World Series. They were kind of in rebuilding mode. So when they shipped him out to Arizona, he joined Randy Johnson in Arizona, and Schilling and Johnson kind of formed that great pit. They're both co-MVPs of the 2001 World Series. So Schilling, he pitched, I think it was in Game 2 or Game 3 he started in that World Series against the Yankees. He did pitch in it was in Game 7. I think he started Game 7 of that World Series too. But when Arizona won the World Series that year, he was co-MVP with Randy Johnson that year. Let's see. Then I want to talk about Pedro Martinez for a minute. So Pedro, he began his career with the Dodgers. He wasn't considered. A lot of people didn't think he was going to be good enough to be a starting pitcher, at least be a pitcher in the major league level. So he became kind of a reliever. His older brother Ramon was already an established pitcher with the Dodgers at that time. Eventually, he became. So he didn't really have a shot with the Dodgers. The Dodgers didn't really think he could be a great pitcher, so they shipped him out to Montreal. When he got to Montreal, he met up with Joe Kerrigan, who was his pitching coach at the time, and Joe Kerrigan helped work on him work on his changeup, his fastball. His changeup was his best pitch for Pedro, I feel. He had one of the better changeups that I ever saw from a pitcher. He did win a Cy Young with Montreal. Then when there was a point where Montreal knew they weren't going to be able to keep him, so they shipped him out to Boston. As soon as he got to Boston, the Red Sox signed him to a long-term deal. The season that Pedro had, though, in 1999 and 2000, I feel the greatest pitching performances I ever saw from a pitcher. So in '99, he won over 20 games. I think his ERA was just under 2. He had over 300 strikeouts. started the All-Star game at Fenway that year, where he struck out the first. I think he struck out 5 of the first 6 guys he faced. He walked the guy in between, but came out of the bullpen in the postseason that year and helped the Red Sox get to the championship series. 2000 was kind of a lost season for the Red Sox. The Red Sox didn't make the postseason that year. I think Pedro was maybe won 18 games and lost 7 or 6 that year. He could have very easily won. Many feel he could have won 30 games that year, but it didn't end up happening. I think his ERA that year was well on the 180 or something that year. The thing about Pedro was I think he had over 200 games where we had at least 10 or more strikeouts per game. Let's see, what else is there? Some other. Oh, so I just want.
There's other stuff on the other side.
Oh, there's more stuff. Let's see, greatest ballparks. I mean, I've been to Fenway, I've been to Yankee Stadium, I've been to the old stadium the Mets. I forget the stadium the Mets used to play at. I forget what it's called, but I went there a couple times. I've been to Turner Field a couple times, but to me, I think the best park I've never been to is Wrigley Field. I've always wanted to go to Wrigley Field. I've never been there. Just to see the ivory and everything. But I think, obviously, when I was at Yankee Stadium, I got a chance to see some of the greatest players that the Yankees ever had. They had that monument out in center field, or left center field. Fenway is a good park to go to. Obviously, when I was a kid, they didn't have the seats on top of the monster yet. I think it was maybe 2006, I believe, is when they brought the seats on top of the monster. So it's weird. So I was going through some old videos of when I was a kid. There's different places I saw. It was weird seeing when they were playing that they didn't have seats on top of the green monster like they do now. So Ozzie Smith is kind of an interesting name. He wasn't a great offensive player, but he'll probably be the last player that ever gets voted into the Hall of Fame based on defense. I think he won. I want to say, was it someone like who was like 16 or 17 Gold Gloves in his career? I don't remember much of Ozzie Smith. I saw the twilight of his career in the mid-90s. I know he did want to play another season, but Tony La Russa wouldn't let him play every single day, so he just ended up, I think he retired or something. The Braves, when they won the World Series in '95, they had some good players that year. They had David Justice, they had Chipper Jones, they had Andrew Jones was there, Marquise Grissom was there, they had the big three with their pitching staff was on that team, Fred McGriff was there. But David Justice was criticized he criticized the fans or something for not backing the team. And he goes on and hits a home run in like a 1-0 game. I want to say that was I think it was game 5 or game 6. And he became a hero with the Braves after that. He was eventually shipped out of Atlanta because I forget exactly what he said, but he attacked the fans, and it was mentioned in the paper the following day. And he goes and hits a home run that night in the World Series game. But he made some enemies in Atlanta for that. When they shipped him to Cleveland, they brought in Kenny Lofton. Forget who else they brought in. They brought in. I know it was Kenny Lofton was the guy they had brought in. But David Justice did have a good career though. He was the guy who could have had a Hall of Fame career. But I think when he attacked the fans in Atlanta in '95, it kind of spoiled his chances of going to the Hall of Fame. So let's talk about, I know we talked about briefly about Derek Jeter for a minute. So, like I said, Jeter earlier in the show, I think Jeter was one of the best two-strike hitters I ever saw in play the game. Jeter talked about growing up. All he wanted to be was to be the shortstop for the Yankees. And he worked 7 days a week to make that happen. And he obviously was eventually able to make it happen. He wasn't considered a home run hitter. He was more of a line drive singles type hitter. Drove in some runs. Won a bunch of Gold Gloves, and I think he won maybe 8 or 9 Gold Gloves. Had over 3,000 hits. Won a bunch of World Series. He won a bunch of World Series early in his career. He was a World Series in '96. He won again in '98, '99, and 2000. Then he was also there in 2009 when they won. I know when the Yankees, when they acquired Alex Rodriguez, there was some talk about whether or not he would remain as a shortstop or not. Because Alex Rodriguez they said that Alex Rodriguez couldn't play third base. So the Yankees kept Jeter at short. They moved A-Rod to third. Let's see. So I want to talk about, let's see, some ballparks I miss seeing on TV. Obviously, Tiger Stadium was a place I always wanted to go to, but I don't think it still stands anymore. Let's see. Let's see, what else is there? Some guys, let's talk about, there's some guys who are playing the game today who I feel will be Hall of Fame players. I know Albert Pujols is a definite Hall of Famer. Mookie Betts is kind of maybe a borderline Hall of Famer. I think if he can pick his career back up. I think Rafael Devers and Xander Bogaerts are going to be future Hall of Famers. Mike Trout is definitely going to be a Hall of Famer at some point. Let's see.
How about your current Braves?
Oh, the current Braves? I mean, they're doing okay. I mean, I'm not sure what their overall record is, but I mean, it's hard to repeat as world champions. Nobody's done it since the Yankees did in 2000. So I know they lost Freddie Freeman, their franchise player, in the offseason, but they picked up Matt Olson to replace him. I think the Braves, I believe they currently sit in. They do have some injuries. They're waiting for Ronald Acuna Jr. is still injured. I think he's rehabbing. He should be back hopefully sometime next month. There's some talk about them possibly going after Xander Bogaerts if the Red Sox fall out of contention, which would be great, but I don't think the Red Sox have any intention of moving Xander Bogaerts anytime soon. I know it's been rumored about it. I think the Braves could use another pitcher, though. I know John Smoltz has talked about the pitching staff with Atlanta right now. Let's see. Travis Darno has been pretty good.
1 minute.
Okay, I just want to start. Okay, so I want to start wrapping things up. So, thank you for joining me for this first episode of the Koop Scoop. So I do want to wrap things up. So again, my name is Steve Kuplast, and thank you for sitting back, and hopefully you enjoyed the episode 1 of the Koop Scoop with Steve Kuplast. I'm signing off. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.